The Louisiana air in 1858 was a living, breathing weight, thick with the fragrance of damp ground, decomposing foliage, and the sickly sweetness of sugarcane. It stuck to your skin, worked its way into the very thread of life, and frequently transported mysteries. Yet no secret was quite so deeply disturbing, quite so fundamentally unnatural, as the one uncovered beneath the crumbling grandeur of Bellichas Plantation. Picture, if you're able, a young girl, not an apparition, not a fleeting echo of memory, but an actual flesh-and-blood human being, discovered not in a meadow, not wandering a pathway, but in the suffocating blackness underneath the very planks of a sprawling antebellum residence, entirely by herself. For what duration? Nobody could determine. What sustained her? What quenched her thirst? How did she endure the rodents, the serpents, the crushing humidity, the absolute devastating solitude? The uncertainties accumulated like the Spanish moss draping ancient oaks, each one more burdensome than the previous, each suggesting a darker, more horrifying reality. This wasn't a story of a youngster lost in the wilderness, or an escaped slave concealed in a shed. This was a child who had, through some unimaginable means, created a dwelling in the neglected gap between the soil and the foundation of a home, a residence filled with people who insisted they knew every soul on their extensive property. And the most disturbing question of all, why had nobody reported her absent? Why had nobody looked for her? The very notion, a tiny, quiet existence living in the invisible emptiness beneath their feet, was enough to turn your blood cold, to transform the most magnificent halls into the loneliest of graves. This was a revelation that would unravel more than just an enigma. It would tear apart the very fabric of what the Vogland family thought they understood about their reality and about themselves. It stood as proof that occasionally the deepest horrors aren't those that shriek, but those that merely exist in the quiet, overlooked corners of human apathy. Before we continue with what transpired at Bellichas Plantation, take a moment to leave a comment below and let us know your listening location. And if you're just joining us, hit that subscribe button and ring the bell. We share fresh narratives every week, and you won't want to miss what's ahead. Now, let's return to Louisiana. 1858, Bellichas Plantation was far more than just a group of structures. It represented an entire domain carved from the fertile, unyielding earth of Louisiana. Positioned on the western shoreline of the mighty Mississippi, roughly 40 miles south of Baton Rouge, its vast sugarcane fields extended for miles, a lush, whispering ocean beneath the relentless summer heat. The primary residence, an impressive two-level structure with broad verandas and soaring white columns, had previously exemplified French Creole refinement. But now, in 1858, a subtle deterioration had started to appear, a gentle peeling of paint, a minor leaning of a shutter, a constant dampness that even the most powerful river breezes couldn't fully remove. The fragrance of molasses, dense and sugary from the adjacent sugar mill, blended with the natural scent of the river and the faint metallic edge of the cane fields, producing a distinctive, nearly intoxicating aroma that defined Bellichas. Armand Vlan, the proprietor of Bellichas, was a gentleman in his early 50s, his ancestry reaching back to the region's original French pioneers. His features were angular, his eyes a cool, calculating blue that appeared to observe everything while exposing nothing. He carried himself with a silent, almost predatory grace, his thoughts constantly consumed by financial records, harvest quantities, and the detailed, frequently harsh mathematics of his operation. Within the parish, he commanded respect, a man of structure and custom, his pledge as solid as the cypress timbers of his dwelling. Yet there existed a chilliness to Armand, an emotional detachment that maintained even his nearest colleagues at a distance. He interpreted existence through categories of gains and losses, and human beings, particularly those under his authority, frequently fell into the latter classification. His wife, Adelaide Vauquelin, a woman nearing 50, presented a sharp difference. Raised in a distinguished South Carolina household, she had been cultivated with fragile sensibilities, schooled in literature and music, and instilled with a quiet, almost delicate devotion. The lavishness of Bellichas, the enormous scope of its activities, and the inherent cruelty of the system supporting it had always troubled her deeply. Her days revolved around managing the household, supervising the domestic help, and caring for her tiny, carefully maintained rose garden, a burst of vivid color against the soft greens and browns of the plantation. She harbored profound, unspoken anxieties, her discomfort with her circumstances revealing itself in a continuous, almost ghostly pallor, and a tendency to withdraw into the silent sanctuary of her thoughts. She longed for an alternative existence, another era. But the forces shaping her life proved too powerful to resist. Nettie, an enslaved woman in her early 30s, navigated the great house with nearly invisible competence. Her complexion resembled rich soil, her eyes dark and perceptive, observing everything occurring within the Vauquelin household. She served as Armand's personal attendant and Adelaide's most trusted domestic worker, a position offering her a distinctive, if vulnerable, perspective. She understood the home's patterns, the wordless tensions, the subtle emotional shifts that preceded trouble. Nettie possessed quiet strength, her observations keen, her advice, when requested, delivered with wisdom forged through necessity and survival. They trusted her, yes, but in that world trust remained a delicate commodity, always provisional, always overshadowed by the constant threat of arbitrary authority. Beyond the main house, extending into the shimmering warmth, lay the quarters of the enslaved population. Countless individuals labored in the cane fields, their existences governed by sunrise and sunset, the crop's requirements, and their master's whims. This constituted a world contained within another, a vibrant, resilient culture created through adversity, possessing its own language, traditions, and concealed knowledge transmitted across generations. Whispers traveled faster than any horse, and secrets received protection through fierce collective devotion. Deputy Sheriff Tabado, a man in his 40s wearing an expression of permanent weariness, represented local law enforcement. Not overtly cruel, he nonetheless remained a product of his era and location, deeply dedicated to preserving the established hierarchy. His practicality frequently bordered on indifference, and his probes seldom extended beyond superficial examination if they threatened to upset the parish's fragile power dynamics. He favored quiet conclusions, even when that meant overlooking uncomfortable realities. Reverend Fenn, an itinerant Methodist preacher in his 60s, appeared as a familiar if somewhat unusual presence at Belishaw's. He visited the plantation quarterly, conducting services for both the Vauquelin family and the enslaved community. His sermons combined fire and brimstone warnings with gentle, compassionate guidance. He possessed genuine faith, his eyes frequently holding a sadness suggesting profound comprehension of human suffering. He perceived more than most, and his quiet observations often carried weight that others dismissed. 4 months before the strange discovery, a young girl named Celeste, an enslaved child of approximately 7 or 8 years, had vanished from Belshaw's. Her disappearance received treatment marked by chilling unconcern. Armand simply recorded it in his ledger as a loss, a minor inconvenience within his overall operations. Adelaide expressed brief worry, offered a quiet prayer, but life's demands quickly overshadowed memories of a child she barely recognized. Among the enslaved community, however, Celeste's absence created an open wound. Whispers circulated, sold south, some said a common fate for children whose parents proved troublesome or whose labor no longer generated profit. Others suggested a more sinister conclusion, a silent disappearance into the vast, unfeeling landscape. But nobody had truly searched. No official report had been submitted beyond Armand's notation. Celeste had simply dissolved, consumed by the insatiable swamp of the plantation system, leaving behind merely a lingering sense of unease, a shadow stretching across the sun-drenched fields of Belchasse. And then the sounds began. Faint initially, easily attributed to rats scurrying or old timbers settling, but they intensified gradually, persistently, until they became undeniable, a rhythmic scratching, a soft, almost melodic hum emanating from the very earth beneath the dwelling. A sound promising to shatter Belishaz's fragile peace and expose a truth far more terrifying than anyone could envision. The sound started subtly, a faint, nearly imperceptible scratching that Nettie first noticed while polishing silver in the dining room. A rhythmic, persistent whisper, like tiny claws dragging across rough wood, or perhaps a small creature excavating. She dismissed it initially, attributing it to the usual nighttime symphony of an aging house: rats in walls, wind playing tricks with loose shutters, ancient beams groaning. But as days merged into a week, the scratching grew more distinct, more purposeful. It no longer seemed random. It followed a pattern, a soft, almost rhythmic cadence, sometimes accompanied by a faint, high-pitched hum resembling a child's lullaby muffled through heavy fabric. Nettie mentioned it to Adelaide, her voice carefully measured. "Mistress, there's an odd sound under the house near the dining room. Been hearing it for days now." Adelaide, preoccupied with a wilting rose bush, waved dismissively. "Likely just field mice, Nettie. The heat drives them inside. Have one of the boys set traps?" Armand, when informed, merely grunted, his eyes still fixed on a column of figures in his ledger. "Nonsense. The foundations are solid. It's the wind, woman, or your imagination." He had no patience for such trivialities, especially with sugar prices fluctuating. But the sounds persisted, growing bolder, more insistent. At night, in the oppressive stillness of the house, they became undeniable. Adelaide, typically a sound sleeper, found herself lying awake, straining to hear, her heart quickening with each faint scratch, each ghostly hum. It was no longer merely a sound. It was a presence, a persistent, unsettling vibration seeming to emanate from the very core of the earth beneath her home. She imagined things, dark, slithering things burrowing deeper, closer. The thought made her skin crawl. Finally, after nearly 10 days of this auditory torment, Adelaide confronted Armand with rare desperation. "Armand, I cannot sleep. Something exists beneath the house. It is not mice. It is different." Her voice emerged thin, greedy with exhaustion and fear. Armand, annoyed by her persistence, sighed dramatically. "Very well, Adelaide. I will investigate this phantom menace myself. But I warn you, if it proves merely a family of opossums, I shall expect an apology for disturbing my sleep." That night, a humid, moonless night when the air hung thick and motionless, Armand Vlar, lantern in hand, descended into the crawl space beneath Belchau's. The entrance was a small wooden hatch near the house's rear, usually covered by a heavy stone. As he lifted it, a wave of cool, damp air, heavy with rich black earth and decaying vegetation, wafted upward. He lowered himself into the narrow opening, the lantern casting dancing shadows that stretched and distorted the ancient cypress piers supporting the house. The crawl space was a labyrinth of darkness and moisture. The ground combined packed earth and mud, slick in places, and the air hung thick with mildew and something else, something faintly animal yet not entirely unpleasant. Spider webs, thick and glistening, brushed against his face, and occasional scuttling sounds of unseen creatures echoed in the oppressive silence. Armand, a man of order and control, felt a rare tremor of unease. This was the wild, untamed underbelly of his meticulously organized world. He moved slowly, carefully, his boots sinking slightly into the soft earth. The lantern beam cut through the gloom, illuminating roots snaking like ancient serpents and the rough unfinished undersides of floorboards above. He reached the area directly beneath the dining room, the source of the persistent sounds. He paused, holding his breath, listening, and then he heard it, not scratching, not humming, but a faint, almost imperceptible thump, 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 like a tiny muffled heartbeat. It originated directly beneath the floorboards, just a few feet from where he stood. He raised the lantern, its light piercing the deepest shadows, and there, huddled in a small, scooped-out hollow in the earth, nestled between two massive cypress piers, sat a child. She was small, impossibly small, her body curled into a tight ball, knees drawn to her chest. Her hair, a tangled mass of dark, matted curls, was streaked with mud and dust, obscuring much of her face. Her skin, a pale dark complexion, was grimy, but beneath the dirt it held a translucent quality, as if she hadn't seen true sunlight in months. Her clothes were rags, indistinguishable in the dim light, but they seemed made of coarse homespun cotton. As the lantern light fell upon her, she slowly, deliberately uncurled, her head lifting, and two enormous dark eyes, wide and unblinking, met Armand's gaze. They were eyes holding no fear, no surprise, no recognition. Only a profound, ancient stillness, reflecting the lantern light like polished obsidian. Around her in the small hollow lay a few crude handmade items, a small chipped clay cup half buried in the earth, a piece of torn fabric faded and worn but with a faint pattern still visible, and clutched in her small dirt-caked hand, a tiny, intricately carved wooden bird, its wings spread as if in silent flight. She did not cry out. She did not flinch. She did not attempt to scramble away. She simply sat there, utterly silent, utterly still, her dark eyes fixed on Armand, a living, breathing enigma in the suffocating darkness beneath Belchas. The silence stretched, thick and heavy, broken only by the frantic pounding of Armand's own heart. He had come expecting rats, perhaps a stray dog. He had discovered something far more terrifying, a child living alone in the dark beneath his very feet. A silent testament to a truth he could not yet comprehend. The morning following the discovery dawned with brutal, unyielding heat, but the air inside Belchas felt colder than any winter night. The child, still silent, was brought into the house, her small dirt-caked form a stark contrast to the polished mahogany and gleaming brass. Nettie, her face a mask of carefully controlled emotion, gently washed the child, revealing skin the color of warm honey, marred by faint scratches and insect bites. Her hair, once matted, now formed a soft, dark cloud around a face surprisingly delicate, though gaunt. Her eyes, still enormous and dark, seemed to absorb all light, reflecting nothing but a profound, unnerving emptiness. Adelaide, upon seeing the child in the harsh daylight, gasped, a hand flying to her mouth. The child was clearly malnourished, her limbs thin, her belly slightly distended, but it was the eyes that truly disturbed her. They held the wisdom of ages, yet the innocence of a creature untouched by human interaction. Armand, for his part, maintained rigid composure, his jaw tight. He had sent a rider for Dr. Prout, the local physician, a man known for his pragmatic approach to all ailments, physical or otherwise. Dr. Prout arrived an hour later, a portly man in his 50s with a perpetually skeptical expression and a medical bag smelling faintly of antiseptic and stale tobacco. He examined the child with clinical detachment, his fingers probing her small frame, his stethoscope pressed against her tiny chest. He noted her rapid, shallow breathing, the faint tremor in her hands, the dullness of her reflexes. Malnutrition, certainly, he pronounced, his voice gruff, and likely some form of sensory deprivation. She's been living in darkness, I'd wager, perhaps for months. He carefully avoided speculating on how she came to be there, or why no one had noticed. His job was to diagnose the physical, not the moral. He prescribed a regimen of small, frequent meals, rich broths, and plenty of fresh water. He also suggested quiet, gentle interaction, though he doubted it would yield much. She's like a wild thing, Mrs. V for clean, he observed, wiping his hands on a linen cloth. Needs to be coaxed back to the world. The child, true to Dr. Prout's assessment, would not speak. She ate when food was placed before her, consuming it with quiet intensity, her eyes never leaving the person who offered it. She watched everything, her gaze following every movement, every flicker of emotion on the faces around her. She made no sound, not a whimper, not a sigh. She simply existed, a silent observer in a world suddenly, bewilderingly full of light and noise. Adelaide, despite her initial shock, found herself drawn to the child. She would sit with her for hours in the parlor, reading aloud from her favorite novels, her voice soft and melodic. The child would listen, her dark eyes fixed on Adelaide's face, though whether she understood a single word was impossible to tell. Adelaide would brush her hair, gently comb out the tangles, and the child would allow it, her body still, almost pliant. A profound loneliness in the child's silence resonated with Adelaide's own unspoken isolation. Deputy Sheriff Thibodeau arrived later that afternoon, his face grim. Armand had sent for him, hoping for swift, discreet resolution. Thibodeau questioned Armand, then Adelaide, his questions circling the obvious. Who is she? Where did she come from? How long was she there? Ammon offered vague answers, insisting he had no idea, that she must have wandered onto the property. Thibodeau, a man knowing the rhythms of the parish, found this explanation unsatisfying. A child living beneath a house for months unnoticed strained credulity. He then attempted to question the child, kneeling before her, his voice surprisingly gentle. "Little one, can you tell me your name? Where are your mama and papa?" The child merely stared, her dark eyes unblinking, her silence absolute. Thibodeau sighed, running a hand over his tired face. This was going to be complicated. If this story is already getting under your skin, good. That means we're doing our job. Before we continue, take a second to hit that like button. It genuinely helps us keep making stories like this one. And leave a comment. What do you think was really happening at Belchess? We want to hear your theories. Now, back to 1858. It was Nettie, while carefully folding the child's few rags, who made the crucial discovery. Among the tattered remnants of what might have once been a dress, she found a small triangular piece of fabric carefully tucked into a seam. It was a vibrant blue cotton patterned with tiny white flowers, a distinctive print that Nettie recognized instantly. Her breath hitched in her throat. She knew that fabric. She had seen it before. It was from a dress that had belonged to Celeste. The same Celeste who had gone missing 4 months ago, supposedly sold south. Nettie's hands trembled as she held the fabric, her mind racing. If this child had Celeste's dress, what did that mean? Was this Celeste? No. The child was too small, too young. Celeste had been older, perhaps 8. This child looked no older than 5, perhaps 6. But the fabric was undeniable. It was a thread, fragile yet strong, connecting the silent child beneath the floor to the vanished girl, Celeste, and to a truth that Belchas had desperately tried to bury. Reverend Fenn arrived at Belchas for his quarterly visit a week after the child's discovery, his worn leather Bible clutched in his hand, his eyes already holding that familiar, sorrowful gaze. He was a man who saw the world through a lens of quiet suffering, and the atmosphere at Belly's, usually one of strained politeness, now thrummed with almost palpable tension. He greeted Alma and Adelaide, his questions about their health met with clipped evasive answers. It was Nettie, her face carefully impassive, who led him to the parlor where the child sat, silent and watchful in a large armchair. The moment Reverend Fenn's eyes fell upon the child, a flicker of profound recognition, then deep aching sorrow, crossed his face. He knelt before her, his gnarled hand reaching out, then hesitating. "Little one," he murmured, his voice thick with emotion, "you have Celeste's eyes." He looked up at Adelaide, his gaze piercing. "This child, she reminds me so much of Celeste. The way she holds herself, the quietness." Adelaide, flustered, explained the circumstances of the child's discovery, omitting, of course, the piece of fabric. Reverend Fenn listened, his expression growing graver with each word. He had known Celeste well. Unlike many, he had seen beyond her status, recognizing a sharp, inquisitive mind. In secret, during his visits, he had been teaching her to read and write, using passages from the Bible as their primer. Celeste had been a quick study, her small fingers tracing letters with eager intensity, her mind absorbing knowledge like a sponge. She had been a bright, curious spark in a world that sought to dim all such lights. Through the fragmented accounts of Nettie and others in the enslaved community, a clearer, yet more disturbing picture of Celeste began to emerge. Celeste had been a child of unusual perception. She had a knack for noticing things, for piecing together disparate observations. She spent much of her time in the main house, running errands, helping Nettie, and often simply observing. She had a particular fascination with the papers Armand Vauquelin kept in his study. She would often see him poring over ledgers, his brow furrowed, his pen scratching across the pages. Nettie recalled Celeste asking her once, "Nettie, why does Master Armand write so many numbers? And why do some of the numbers not match the people?" Nettie had dismissed it, telling Celeste not to concern herself with Master's business, a warning born of fear. But Celeste, it seemed, had not heeded the warning. She had begun to ask questions, quiet, innocent questions, but questions that, in the context of Belishos, were dangerous. She had noticed discrepancies, small inconsistencies in the records she glimpsed, particularly concerning the movement of enslaved people and the corresponding financial entries. She had seen a specific ledger bound in dark leather that Armand kept locked in his desk. A ledger she had once seen him consult with a man from New Orleans, their voices low and urgent. The night Celeste disappeared, 3 other things had happened simultaneously, events that at the time seemed unrelated, but now, in the shadow of the silent child, took on chilling significance. First, a small but valuable silver locket belonging to Adelaide had gone missing from her dressing table. Adelaide had been distraught, accusing one of the house servants, though no one confessed, and the locket was never found. Second, a particularly fierce storm had swept through the parish, bringing torrential rains and high winds, knocking out power and felling several ancient trees near the river. The chaos of the storm provided perfect cover for any clandestine activity. And third, a new overseer, a man named Silas Croft, known for his brutal efficiency and unquestioning loyalty to Armour, had arrived at Bellies, replacing the previous more lenient overseer who had suddenly and without explanation been dismissed. The confluence of these events, a missing locket, a violent storm, a new ruthless overseer, now seemed less like coincidence and more like a carefully orchestrated sequence designed to obscure a far darker truth. Celeste, it seemed, had stumbled upon something she wasn't meant to see, something Armand Vauquelin desperately wanted hidden. And the silent child with Celeste's eyes and Celeste's fabric was the living, breathing proof of that terrible secret. The discovery of the child and the unsettling implications of Celeste's fabric cast a long, cold shadow over Belishos. Adelaide, usually a creature of habit, found her routines disrupted, her thoughts consumed by the silent girl now occupying a small room off the kitchen. The child, whom Adelaide had tentatively named Lily, a name seeming to suit her delicate, almost ethereal presence, remained mute, her dark eyes observing everything with unnerving intensity. One sweltering afternoon, with Armand away in Baton Rouge on plantation business and the house staff occupied with the endless chores of a grand estate, Adelaide found herself alone in the vast, echoing silence of Belishos. A strange, almost magnetic pull drew her toward Armand's private study, a room she had rarely entered, a sanctuary of ledgers and documents that had always felt forbidden. It was a space embodying Armand's cold, calculating world, a world she had always instinctively recoiled from. But now, desperate, gnawing curiosity, fueled by the silent child and the ghost of Celeste, propelled her forward. The study was exactly as Armand left it, meticulously organized, the air thick with old paper, leather, and pipe tobacco. Bookshelves lined the walls, filled with volumes on agriculture, law, and economics. A large, heavy mahogany desk dominated the room's center, its surface clear save for a silver inkwell, a quill pen, and a stack of neatly bound papers. Adelaide's heart hammered against her ribs as she approached the desk, her fingers trembling slightly. She knew Arm kept his most important documents, his most sensitive records, in a locked drawer. She tried the top drawer first. Locked. Then the second. Also locked. A wave of despair washed over her. How could she find anything? Then her gaze fell upon a small, ornate silver key, half hidden beneath a stack of financial reports on a side table. Ammon was usually so meticulous. Had he forgotten it, or had he, in his haste, simply overlooked it? A shiver ran down her spine. It felt less like an oversight and more like a deliberate, almost taunting invitation. With a deep, shaky breath, Adelaide picked up the key. It was cold and heavy in her palm. She returned to the desk, and with a soft click, the third drawer slid open. Inside, nestled amongst other documents, lay a single dark, leather-bound ledger. It was thicker, older, and more worn than the others she had seen Armand consult. This was it. This was the ledger Celeste had glimpsed, the one holding numbers that didn't match. Adelaide pulled it out, her hands clammy. The leather was smooth and cool beneath her fingertips. She opened it, and the faint musty scent of aged paper filled her nostrils. The pages were filled with Armand's precise, elegant script, columns of figures, dates, and names. But these weren't just names of crops or supplies. These were names of people, and next to many of them, chillingly, were dates of acquisition and disposition. She began to read, her eyes scanning the entries, her breath catching in her throat. There were records of sales, purchases, transfers to other plantations. But then she saw entries that made her blood run cold. Names followed by dates, and then instead of a sale price or new location, cryptic notations: lost to fever, runaway, presumed deceased, disappeared, no trace. And beneath these, often a small, almost imperceptible financial adjustment, a quiet write-off. It was the horror of paperwork, of accounting, of a system so normalized that human lives and their sudden, unexplained cessation received the same dispassionate precision as a damaged tool or a failed crop. Her gaze fell upon a specific entry dated 4 months prior: Celeste. Next to the name, not sold to Mr. Dubois or transferred to Evergreen Plantation, but simply disappeared. No trace. Value adjusted. And then a small, almost imperceptible symbol, a tiny hand-drawn bird identical to the one the silent child clutched. Adelaide's eyes darted back to the previous page. There, beneath another disappeared entry, was the same small bird, and another, and another. It wasn't a symbol of loss, she realized with sickening lurch. It was a symbol of disposal, a quiet, efficient way to erase a life, to make it disappear from the ledgers, from the world. And the financial adjustments, the value-adjusted notations, were not for losses but for gains. The quiet, untraceable profits from lives that simply vanished. Then her eyes caught something else tucked into the very back of the ledger, almost hidden. It was a small folded piece of paper, not Armand's neat script, but a child's crude, hesitant drawing. It depicted a stick figure, small and alone, beneath a large looming house. And in the corner of the drawing, almost like a signature, was the same tiny hand-carved wooden bird that the silent child Lily now held. Adelaide didn't take anything. She couldn't. Her hands shook too violently. She carefully placed the drawing back in the ledger, closed the dark leather cover, and returned it to the locked drawer. She replaced the key beneath the financial reports, her movements precise, almost mechanical. She closed the study door behind her, the click of the latch echoing in the silent house. That evening she sat at the dinner table, the grand dining room bathed in candlelight's soft glow. Armand returned from Baton Rouge, spoke of sugar prices and new machinery. Adelaide listened, her gaze distant. She passed the butter to him, her fingers brushing his, and she felt profound, chilling revulsion. She looked at his cold, calculating eyes, his precise movements. And she knew. She knew what he was. And she knew that she would never look at him the same way again. The horror was not in screams, but in silence, in the ledger, in the quiet, efficient erasure of lives, and in the small hand-carved bird connecting vanished Celeste to the silent child beneath the floor. Just when we thought we understood what was happening at Belcher's plantation, the horror deepens. And it's not the kind that screams, it's the kind that whispers. If this story gives you chills, share it with a friend who loves dark mysteries and hit that like button so we know you're here with us. We have much more to reveal. The silent child, Lily, remained a mystery to all but Adelaide. Days turned into weeks, and still no sound escaped her lips. Dr. Prout's gentle coaxing, Nettie's patient care, Reverend Fenn's soft hymns, nothing elicited a spoken word. Yet her eyes, those enormous dark pools of ancient stillness, missed nothing. Adelaide, in a moment of quiet inspiration, offered Lily a piece of charcoal and a sheet of paper. The child took them, her small fingers closing around the charcoal with almost desperate grip. And then she began to draw. She drew with the ferocity and focus of someone trying to say everything they could not say out loud, her small hand moving with surprising certainty. Over the course of 2 weeks, she produced 8 drawings, each one a revelation, each one answering one question and raising 3 more. They were crude, innocent, drawn with simple lines of a child. Yet their content was devastating. The first drawing was of a large, looming house, its columns stark and white, its windows dark and empty. Beneath the house, a small curled figure, almost indistinguishable from shadows. It was Belshazzar, seen from below, from the crawl space perspective. The second drawing depicted a woman, tall and slender, with long flowing hair. Her face was indistinct, but her hands were outstretched, as if reaching or pleading. Next to her, a smaller figure, a child with the same distinctive dark matted curls as Lily. This, Adelaide realized with a jolt, was Celeste, and perhaps her mother or another woman who had cared for her. The third drawing was more abstract, a series of dark swirling lines like a storm. Within the storm, faint outlines of falling trees and a small, terrified face peering out from behind a thick root. It was the night Celeste disappeared, the night of the great storm, seen through a hiding child's eyes beneath the house. The fourth drawing was chilling in its simplicity. It showed a man, tall and imposing, his face a blank oval, but his hand holding a small dark object. Next to him, another figure, smaller, with a distinctive cruel sneer. This was Silas Croft, the new overseer, and the blank-faced man could only be Armand. The dark object in Armand's hand was ambiguous, but implication was clear. The fifth drawing was a series of numbers, crudely scrolled but recognizable as figures. Beneath them, a small hand-drawn bird, identical to the one Lily clutched and the one Adelaide had seen in Armand's ledger. It was Celeste's attempt to communicate the numbers she had seen, the discrepancies she had noticed, the financial adjustments marking an erased life. The sixth drawing was perhaps the most disturbing. It showed a small open box, and inside it, not treasure, but a dark, indistinct shape. Above the box, a hand dropping something into it, and around the box, several small dark figures like watching shadows. It depicted something being hidden, something being buried, something being disposed of. The seventh drawing was of a locket, small and silver, with distinctive engraving. It was Adelaide's locket, the one that had gone missing the night Celeste disappeared. The child had seen it, had witnessed its disappearance, and now, through her art, was revealing its fate. The eighth and final drawing was stark, almost brutal. A small figure curled in a ball beneath the house's floorboards. But this time, above the house, a single enormous eye, wide open, watching. It was the child's self-portrait, a testament to her existence, her silent vigil, her profound, terrifying witness. Adelaide, her heart aching, laid the drawings out on the parlor table. She knew with certainty chilling her to the bone that these were not mere childish scribbles. They were testimony, a silent confession, a horrifying narrative told through charcoal and paper. Armel returned from Baton Rouge that evening, his mood sour from difficult negotiation. He entered the parlor, expecting Adelaide engaged in her usual quiet pursuits. Instead, he found her standing over the table, her face pale, her eyes fixed on the drawings. He approached, his brow furrowed in annoyance. "What is this, Adelaide? More of the child's nonsense." His voice died in his throat as his eyes fell upon the images. The house from below, the storm, the numbers, the locket, and finally the enormous watching eye. His face, usually so composed, contorted into pure, unadulterated rage. "Where did she get these ideas?" he roared, his voice echoing through the silent house. "Who has been filling her head with such fabrications?" Adelaide met his gaze, her own eyes, usually so timid, now burning with quiet, fierce resolve. She drew what she saw, Armin. What she witnessed. What you did. The confrontation was brutal, a clash of wills simmering beneath their marriage's surface for years. Armin denied everything, his denials growing more frantic, more desperate, as Adelaide calmly pointed to each drawing, explaining its horrifying significance. He accused her of madness, of succumbing to enslaved superstitions. But Adelaide held firm, her voice steady, her conviction unwavering. She knew. And he knew that she knew. The next day, Deputy Sheriff Thibodeau returned to Bellichoz, summoned by a TUR note from Armour. He found Armour pacing the parlor, his face flushed, his eyes wild. Adelaide sat quietly, the drawings neatly stacked beside her. Thibodeau, a man who preferred avoiding unpleasantness, listened to Armand's agitated accusations against Adelaide, then turned his gaze to the drawings. His weary eyes scanned each image, and slow, dawning comprehension spread across his face. He recognized the locket. He recognized the crude depiction of Silas Croft, a man he knew to be ruthless. He recognized the numbers, the chilling simplicity of the disappeared entries. He looked at Armand, then at Adelaide, then back at the drawings. The silence in the room was deafening. Before Thibodeau could speak, a carriage rumbled up the drive. Two stern-faced men dressed in dark suits emerged. They were from Baton Rouge, sent by Armand's powerful associates, men with vested interest in maintaining delicate balance of power and quiet flow of commerce in the parish. Their arrival sent a clear message. This matter required handling discreetly, efficiently, without scandal. But Reverend Fenn, who had quietly observed the unfolding drama, had already acted. While the household was consumed by confrontations, he had taken opportunity to make careful, precise copies of each of Lily's drawings, sketching them onto sheets of paper he kept sewn into his worn traveling coat's lining. He knew, with certainty born of faith and experience, that these drawings were more than just a child's art. They were truth needing preservation, a voice needing hearing, even if it had to wait for a time when the world was ready to listen. The arrival of the men from Baton Rouge signaled the beginning of the long silence descending upon Belchaz. They were not lawmen in traditional sense, but agents of influence, their purpose to suppress any burgeoning scandal threatening the delicate economic and social order of the parish. Deputy Sheriff Thibodeau, a man understanding his world's unspoken rules, was quietly persuaded to close his investigation. The official report would state that the child, Lily, was a runaway from a neighboring plantation suffering amnesia, and that Celeste had indeed been sold south, her whereabouts unknown. The drawings were dismissed as confused imaginings of a traumatized child. The truth, however, was far more insidious. Lily, the silent child, was quietly removed from Belchaz. Her destination was never officially recorded. Some whispered she was sent to a New Orleans orphanage, others claimed she was taken by a distant relative of Adelaide's, far from Louisiana's prying eyes. What became of her, whether she ever spoke, whether she ever found peace, remained one of Belchaz's many unanswered questions, swallowed by the vast, indifferent landscape of the past. Adelaide Vauquelin, however, made a decision costing her everything while saving something else. The confrontation with Armalong, the chilling revelations of the ledger and drawings, had shattered her life's fragile illusion. She could no longer live in the house of secrets under the shadow of a man she now saw as a monster. Within weeks of Lily's removal, Adelaide announced her intention to leave Belchaz, citing ill health and need for spiritual solace. She moved to a small, quiet cottage in Charleston, South Carolina, her childhood home, taking with her only a few personal effects and a profound, unshakable sorrow. She never spoke of Belchaz again, but in her quiet acts of charity, her tireless work with orphan children, there existed silent testament to the truth she carried within. She saved her own soul, but the cost was her marriage, her home, her peace of mind. Armand Vauquelin remained at Belchaz, outwardly untouched by events. The men from Baton Rouge ensured no official charges were ever brought, no public accusations ever made, but the long, quiet dissolution of the man had begun. The cold, calculating precision once defining him slowly eroded. He became more withdrawn, his eyes haunted, his once impeccable ledgers occasionally marred by errors, by numbers refusing to balance. The silence of Adelaide's departure, the ghost of Celeste, and the memory of Lily's enormous watching eyes gnawed at him. He was never confronted, never charged, never named in any official record. But the silence, the unspoken knowledge, became his prison. Belize, once his empire, became his tomb. He died a decade later, a lonely, embittered man, his fortune diminished, his legacy tainted by whispers never quite fading. Nettie, a woman of quiet resilience, carried her own truths. In 1863, amidst Civil War chaos, she seized opportunity and left Belchaz, making her way to New Orleans. She found work as heiress, her sharp mind and observant nature serving her well in the bustling city. She never spoke of Belshazzar's secrets, but the memory of Celeste and the silent child remained etched in her heart, a quiet sorrow she carried until her dying day. Reverend Fenn, however, refused to let truth be entirely buried. He continued his itinerant preaching, his sermons growing more impassioned, more focused on justice and inherent dignity of every soul. He kept the copied drawings carefully preserved, sewn into his coat's lining, a silent promise. In 1871, an old man, his body failing, he lay on his deathbed in a small Mississippi parsonage. He summoned a young man named Devo, a bright, earnest student at a Methodist seminary who had often assisted him. To Devo, Fenn entrusted a small wooden box worn smooth with age. Inside, carefully wrapped in linen, were the copied drawings of Lily and 3 pages of Fenn's own meticulous handwritten testimony detailing the events at Belshazzar, the ledger, the disappearances, the chilling implications. "These are not just drawings, son," Fenn had whispered, his voice raspy. "They are a voice. A truth that must one day be heard." Devo, a man of integrity and deep conviction, understood the weight of trust placed upon him. He kept the box, guarding its contents with fierce protectiveness. He studied the drawings, read Fenn's testimony, and understood the profound human horror it represented. He knew time was not yet right, the war's wounds too fresh, desire for forgetting too strong. But he believed, as Fenn had, that truth, like water, would eventually find its way to surface. He would spend his life quietly advocating for justice, for memory, for silenced voices, always keeping the box and its terrible contents safe. And Belshazzar itself. The grand house, once symbol of wealth and power, slowly succumbed to Louisiana wilderness's relentless embrace. The sugarcane fields once meticulously tended became overgrown, reclaimed by wild. The verandas sagged, paint peeled, columns crumbled. The air grew heavy with decay's scent, not just of leaves and wood, but of forgotten dreams and buried truths. And beneath it all, the crawl space, dark and damp, was never used again. No one dared venture into its depths, for it was known, in the quiet, unspoken language of the land, that it held not just earth, but echoes of a silent child and the profound, terrifying truth of what lived and died beneath Belshazzar's floorboards. This mystery shows us that history's most terrifying things were never monsters under the bed. They were men at dinner tables and the silence of those who knew. What do you think really happened at Belshazzar? Leave your theory in comments below. I read every single one. If this story moved you, please subscribe, hit notification bell, and share this with someone needing to hear it.